Hello there. My name is John Muir Laws. Today, I want to share with you the amazing world of nature journaling. I think that keeping a notebook of everything that you see, discover, wonder, and explore, keeping a journal of all of those observations is one of the best things we can do to help us be alive, to help us pay attention to every moment of our lives, to remember our world more vividly, and to develop fundamental skills from observation to being able to draw what you see. Let's take a look inside one of my journals, and I'm just going to give you a general idea of what the nature journal is, and then let's go into some specifics of how you can make this happen in your own notebook. Let's see here. Here's one of my notebooks. And if you flip it open, what you're going to notice is that there are drawings. I'm writing observations about what I see. Here's a little lizard that walked into my backyard. Here's a bean that I was about to eat. Whatever it is, I'm putting my observations, my discoveries down in this book. And then what I do is I force myself to think about each little discovery in some very specific ways that help me then be able to make the most of every observation that I make. And you might be first looking at this and saying, well, oh, that's great. If I happen to be an artist, then I could do this. But I'm seeing you've got a lot of drawings here, and I haven't drawn for a long time. Well, that's not the most important thing. That's actually not at all what this is about. If drawing isn't your thing, that's okay. I draw a lot of pictures in my notebook because I have a learning disability called dyslexia. It makes it difficult for me to use words. So in my journal, I have lots of pictures, but I also include in some words. And the more that I do that, the more I find that I get better at drawing pictures, the better I get at using words. So if for you, your comfort area is writing, then what I want to encourage you to do in your journal is have most of it be writing. But we're also, as you're going to see, we're going to include in some other elements step by step within your comfort zone. We're going to start to add in other sorts of elements into your journal, and you're going to be able to learn how to draw what you see as one of the skills of nature journaling. It comes with the territory of just making lots of drawings. So what I want to do is to show you kind of how I think about what goes on inside a nature journal. And let's take a look here. When I am journaling, it all starts with your brain. And what I'm trying to do is to get my brain to engage with three really important ways of thinking. And this ends up being an interesting activity. When, if I were to take my brain out and weigh it, my brain would weigh about 2% of my whole body weight. But here's the weird thing. My brain uses, every time I'm thinking, it's using 20% of all of my body's energy. It takes a lot of energy to think. And so what my brain sometimes does is it goes, like if I can kind of cut down this amount of energy, if I can make myself think less, make you think less, your brain will do all sorts of tricks to you so that you don't have to pay attention as carefully. So we have to be really careful and deliberate to get our brain to pay attention. And let's take a look at these sort of three different skills that I'm trying to get my brain to do. So the first is I'm going to try to get my brain to pay closer attention. The second is I'm going to try to get my brain to be more curious about everything that I see. And the third is I'm going to try to teach my brain to think in creative ways. I'll define kind of what I mean by that in a moment, but let's just take a look at at these three ideas and how they end up onto the page of a journal. And all of it starts with this, the first one, I think the most critical way to start is to learn how to pay deeper attention. So when I go out into the world and I notice something unusual, I force myself to say, like, what do I notice here? What's going on here? What can I see, smell, touch? How does it sound? How does it feel? All of these little details are different aspects of paying attention. And what I want to do is get all of those observations down onto my paper. Let's take a look at how that can look. So here's a page from my journal. And if you look along the bottom of the page there, I was in Tanzania and I found a little group of cheetahs, and a little impala walked by. So this is a grazing animal that cheetahs like to eat. Well, in a moment, this mama cheetah spotted it, focused on it, and dashed over. This whole time, I'm making quick little sketches, and I'm also, oops, hold on a second. I'm making quick little sketches and recording the details of what I see. So that can be from the posture that the female cheetah is taking as she's kind of looking at this thing, to the sequence of behaviors that happens. So she runs over, there's a big cloud of dust, and ends up sort of out of the dust pile comes this mother cheetah dragging this impala by its throat. It had suffocated the impala to death and brought it over into the shade where the cubs ran over and everybody had a meal. So I can remember this experience vividly because I took notes in my journal. And if I hadn't done that, it is possible that at this point I would say to myself, like, yeah, I think I remember seeing a cheetah and it caught some kind of an animal. But all of these details, like what was the female's posture when she started looking at the impala, all of those sorts of details would by now be completely gone from my memory. But because I journaled about it, it's still with me, and it will be with me for the rest of my life. Here's another example. This is a picture of a leopard sitting in a tree. And this leopard was high up in a tree, legs draped over a branch. And I came up and started sketching the details of what I saw. And as I did, other people saw, like, oh, look, there's a vehicle over there by that tree. And everybody out there knows that if you see a vehicle by a tree, maybe somebody's found a leopard. And so people come over and they go, like, where's the leopard? And then they'd spot it and they go, oh, and they pull out cameras, click, 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 take a bunch of pictures and drive away. Because I was journaling, I was going more slowly. The process of journaling slows me down and forced me to be there for minutes, for an hour. And as I did, a wonderful story began to emerge. You see, in this tree, in addition to this leopard, were two little cubs. And because I was there longer, time passed and the cubs came down out of the branches, started playing around with the mom, who started licking them. It was a wonderful experience. But something that none of those people who are just driving by, click, click, would have been able to see. One of the advantages of nature journaling is that it slows you down. That's one of the powers. So some people would say, like, why would you do that? We can just take a picture. One reason is it's going to help me pay attention, and it's going to give me a thing to do as I take time with any moment in my life. The second big piece is trying to get my curiosity to grow. How can I get my brain to be more curious about everything that I see? If you get yourself curious, an interesting thing happens inside your brain. What happens is your brain releases a chemical called dopamine. And this is a chemical that is involved with helping your brain pay attention and to focus. And so when you're curious, your brain is a better focusing and attention machine. So you start noticing all sorts of details, and also in the presence of this neurotransmitter, you can, your brain will sit and wait longer and longer and longer. It gives you extra patience. This is a wonderful thing. So let's just take a quick look at how does curiosity look on the pages of your journal. So here is a picture of a plant that grows in the ocean. There's what's called a holdfast, which is a little attachment point on a rock, and then a long tube that goes up to a bladder, a little float that has leaf-like appendages on it. That bladder is filled with air. So I was drawing this, I was diagramming it, and as I'm doing that, I started to ask myself, okay, what do I wonder as I look at this thing? I came up with several questions, but one really interesting is, what kind of air is in there? What gas is in there? That little space is filled with gas. Is that carbon dioxide? Is that oxygen? Plants produce oxygen. Is it producing oxygen and putting it in there? So I think that's a really fun question. And I currently don't have the technology to be able to test that. But if I ever meet somebody who does, I know what I'm going to get them to do. So asking questions opens up all sorts of doors in our head. Don't worry about having to be somebody who has all the answers. Train yourself to be someone who has question after question after question. You can also do this with anything. This is a piece of fruit from my kitchen table. I picked up this banana and made a diagram of it. And as I did, I noticed all sorts of strange things about it. There were spots on it, but the spots were only on 2 of the 5 sides. Why does it have 5 sides? Why are there spots only on 2 sides? Is it the same on all the other bananas in the bunch? You see, even with something that I've looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of times, I can still learn something new and ask a question that I've never asked before. So I'm intentionally trying to get myself to be curious. And the third piece is creativity. You can use your nature journal to enhance your creative thinking. And let me define that term the way that I use it. When I say creativity, what I mean is your brain's ability to make useful connections between seemingly unrelated things. Useful connections between seemingly unrelated things. So if I've got this over here and this over here, I want to see, like, how is this like this? How can I put those together? If I can do that, if my brain is a connector, I will start to see relationships that have been hiding before my eyes. All of this goes down on the piece of paper as well. Let's see what that looks like. So here is a piece of fruit. It's a dragon fruit. And what I did is I thought to myself, like, what does this remind me of? It reminded me of a pine cone. It reminded me of a cactus flower. And then I thought to myself, like, this really is similar to a cactus, a little cactus fruit. And then I started playing with it and thinking to myself, is this, in what way is this similar to or different from the fruit of a cactus? I cut it open as part of my investigation, and I was able to figure out some really interesting things about it by my own observations. But for me, a really interesting part of that is, how is this related to cactus? If I was just looking at this thing and sort of staring at a piece of fruit, I don't know if that question would have come to me. But what I intentionally do is I wonder about things. I will say, like, what questions can I pull out of this piece of fruit? Anything that you look at, you can be intentionally curious. You don't have to wait for the question to come to you. You can make curiosity happen on the spot. You can say, who, what, where, when, how, why. So here I'm thinking of, how is this thing related to these cactus? you're not always going to be able to get answers to your questions. And even if you don't answer a question, it's still really useful. You got all this dopamine in your brain. Your attention has gone up. And you very often don't have to answer one question to find an even more interesting and nuanced question behind that first one. Here's another it reminds me of. So I was looking at another cheetah. But then, while I was there watching cheetah, I saw a little bit of movement on the road next to me. And I looked down, and there's a little chameleon walk across the road. Little chameleon is walking across the road, and it has this really interesting way of movement. Instead of just one foot after the other, as it brings its foot over, it kind of pulses in the air like that as its foot comes down, then put its foot down, and then the next one. Really weird. So, like, what's going on with that? Why is it doing this sort of strange walking? That was a really interesting question. Then I thought, like, what kind of it reminds me of can I come up? I start looking carefully at this little chameleon, and they've got these really cool hands. So instead of having fingers, they've got 5 toes. But what has happened is that some of those are fused together, so it makes 2 big pads. My little daughters play with these little toys called Legos. And this reminded me of the hands on little Lego people. They've got these little kind of cup hands. So I discovered that chameleons have Lego hands. Who knew? Right? So whatever comes to your mind, this can be a sort of a scientific observation. It can be a playful observation. It could be scientific, like this is much like the fruit of a cactus. It could be playful. This reminds me of one of my daughter's toys. Whatever your brain connects with this, write that down on paper. And it makes a deeper personal connection with whatever you see. So those are these 3 parts: attention, curiosity, and creativity. An easy way that I have of remembering this is I say to myself, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. That's for attention, curiosity, and creativity. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. And so when I have a bunch of observations down on my piece of paper, I'll say to myself, like, I've got a bunch of observations here. Did I ask any questions? Did I make any connections? So let's try some I wonders here. What can I wonder about this? So you can use this as a little mental checklist, just 3 things. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. Start maybe with some observations, and then invite yourself to ask more questions. Invite yourself to make connections between things. And you'll find that the whole process of looking at whatever is in front of you, from a banana to a chameleon, becomes more exciting and intoxicating. But wait, there's more. Because this is the process that you're going to put down on the pages of a book. What is a journal? It's your brain on paper. So everything that you notice, everything that you wonder, it reminds me of connection, you're going to get out of your head, out of your little piece of electric meat, and get into this notebook. This notebook can hold much more information than your brain can on its own. So let's take a look at some strategies for getting information into this book. There are 3 principal strategies that I use. The first is to draw pictures. Because I am dyslexic, I draw lots of pictures. I make lots of maps. I make lots of diagrams. When I was starting out as a naturalist, this way of recording information felt a little bit less threatening to me. And if it's not your primary way of taking notes, that's absolutely okay. It doesn't have to be. This is just what works for me. But I will start with that. If you like writing better, start with writing. But what I do is I will think to myself, how many different ways can I use drawings or icons or diagrams to get rich information about what I see? So just one drawing, one portrait of something that's just the beginning. So here's some ways that I kind of get my brain to kind of poke around in something more with these drawings. See what it looks like. So I have many different ways of using pictures, and I've described some of them here. I can draw. What a lot of people are used to is they'll say like, oh, you're interested in a bird, right? So there's a portrait of the bird. All right, that's a fine way to start. But there are many other things that you can do. And let's take a look at what some of those are. Because the more different and varied strategies you have for using pictures, the more useful pictures will become to you. So here's a picture of a wasp. And you notice it's just little parts of a wasp. This wasp was moving around inside a little jar, and it was hard for me to kind of watch it as it was moving around. So it was easier for me to focus on just one little piece at a time, one little piece over here, one little piece over here. Get all these little pieces in, and never doesn't have to be assembled together into one thing. This is useful for me to remember the details of this wasp. Is it a head to toe portrait? No. But whatever details I could see, I included those in my diagram. Here's another example. There's two strategies here that I want to point out. The first is I find an interesting bird. It's called a cuckoo. And as I'm sketching this cuckoo, what I'm doing is as the bird moves around, I'm moving around, making drawing after drawing after drawing. So if the bird's over here and I start to draw it, and then the bird moves like that, I start a new drawing. I often don't finish many of these drawings. But if there's one pose that the bird keeps coming back to, and I see again and again and again, that part of my drawing will develop and become even better. The other thing that I want you to notice is this drawing of a mangrove swamp. There is a big lava cliff with mangroves growing along the side. This isn't sort of a portrait, a painting of that mangrove pond. What it is a cross-section diagram. Very often, a diagram like this is easier to do and conveys information about that place in a way that is even more clear. So just think if you had to do a portrait of this place, if that's intimidating, think to yourself, if I were just to take a slice through the land here, how would just a cross section of this look? And you'll find that those kinds of drawings are often a lot easier for us to manage. Another strategy that I have is making maps. So that little triangle down on the bottom of the page is a little corner of lawn in front of a school. And there were places that moles and gophers were coming up and making holes. And the first thing that I did is I made some diagrams of what the gopher holes look like. Those are in pink. And the mole holes look like. Those are in orange. And then I made a color-coded map down below of where I saw gophers and where I saw moles. And also kind of kept track of like, was this fresh or was this old? That ends up being a map with a lot of information. It's got information about the shape of the land. It's got information about where the moles were, where the gophers were, what the ages of these were. All of that information is in there. And again, it doesn't have to be a pretty picture. It's a useful picture. So think of to yourself like, how can I make a useful diagram? What do I want to show here? And what is the easiest, most expedient way of doing that? Let's take a look at another strategy. This is what I call a cross section. And you will notice that there's two drawings of rock formations that are stretching out across a beach. You can notice there's a little map showing where these little slices through the ground are. You can see a little drawing of me sitting there to kind of give you an idea of the scale and the size of these. And then I was looking at fossils and which layers had fossils. This kind of side view diagram again, very useful way of recording information. And this whole idea of diagramming things I find very, very useful. And one way of doing that, excuse me a moment. Hi. One way of doing that is to make a simplified drawing of what you're seeing. I was noticing acacia trees that had been nibbled by animals in Africa. And as you look down the page, you'll see several different shapes of trees. The leaves on the top were lighter green than the leaves on the bottom. And as by just making a simple diagram of those, I made a little collection of funky tree shapes that had been trimmed by animals. What happened was I got this idea in my head of like, wow, look at how the animals trim these trees. How many different kinds of shapes can I find? When you get a project like that in your head, one tree pushes you to find the next one, to find the next one, and it becomes a really fun scavenger hunt as you go looking for all sorts of different shapes of trees or whatever got you curious. So another way we can get information onto our page is to use words. Now, I mentioned before, I'm dyslexic. My spelling is all over the map. I spell the same word on the same page 5 different ways, and I'm okay with that. If I said to myself, oh no, I don't know how to spell that, I won't use that word. I'm limiting my thinking. In the same way, like, oh no, I don't know how to make a pretty picture of that, I guess I won't use a drawing. You're limiting your thinking. The journal is all about your thinking. So there are many ways to use words. You can write a paragraph, and the way your brain thinks when you're writing a paragraph is different than when you're making bullet points or making a title. You can be playful with these words. You can add color. You can make bubble letters. All of these different strategies help you be able to explore and explain whatever you've found with another language. So here are some examples. You notice here I'm primarily using labels and bullet points. So not writing in a big paragraph, little bullet points. And those are fun because once you kind of make a few, the structure of it just invites you to like, yeah, let's put another one down there. What else do we go? What else do we do? When you're making a list like that, it often prompts you in a way that's different than if you're writing a paragraph to put the next discovery and the next discovery and the next discovery. That's an invitation from a bullet point list. Your words can express all sorts of different things. Sometimes my words are scientific. Sometimes my words are playful. Sometimes philosophical. And here I was writing poetry. An easy way to kind of stick poetry in your journal is something called a haiku. This is a really fun poetry form. It's just 3 lines, so it's not going to take you very much time. You can do a haiku really quickly. And the first line has 5 syllables in it. The next one, 7 syllables, and the last one, 5. And I'll read you my favorite one here. There's some lions are sitting underneath a tree. And so this little haiku came to me. It says, "You seem so peaceful. I want to nuzzle your face. That might not go well." Right? So they can be playful, they can be fun. And I invite you to try to do this. You see, what happens if you're just taking notes in a scientific way, you might not pay attention to how you're feeling in the poetry of a moment. So just knowing that that's okay to be in your journal opens up all sorts of possibilities. So you can use that strategy of I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, to look out at another thing. You can also use I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, to look inside. at yourself and how are you feeling and what's going on in your own experience as an observer, as a person sitting out there and experiencing something. A haiku is a really fun invitation to do just that. This is more kind of a long form bullet list. I caught COVID. These are my notes, nature journaling about having COVID-19. And you see, on one day, I was feeling really, really sorry for myself. And the day after that, I had a little bit of a different perspective. And I was realizing just how lucky I was. And the process of writing in my journal opened up this world of gratitude within me. And because I know that others who have had that have not been as lucky as I was. So the journal can be a very powerful place to let yourself explore the world outside as well as the world inside. Another thing that I like to do is to be playful with putting titles onto pages. And this is at when people first see this, the people's initial thought is, well, I don't know if it's necessary to do that. That's just kind of dressing this thing up. But here's what happens. If you have completed a page of observations, and then you look down at your page and you're thinking big picture about what is going on here, and you're trying to come up with a title for that, then you're looking at your page in a really different way. And what your brain is doing is just trying to kind of summarize and create big titles for what you're doing. That will make it easier for you to scan your pages later on. It also helps you just think in one other big picture way. I also like to be playful with those. So I've got an Asian eggplant up at the top, and I drew an eggplant. I drew in tomatillos on my little tomatillo drawing. So you can be playful with how you put those in. And the more you do that, the more fun you're having with it, the more you will explore that. So here's the last language that I suggest you include in your journals. We've talked about drawing pictures. We were using words, but another thing we can do is use numbers. And there are lots of ways to use numbers. You can count things, you can measure things, you can time things, you can show how big something is compared to another thing. All of those strategies are ways of using numbers to get you to think differently. And that's a big part of the point of this. How can I get myself to think differently? The part of your brain that uses words, your prefrontal cortex, is different than your visual centers, your visual cortex in the back of your brain. So when you're drawing pictures, you're using different parts of your brain than when you're using words, you're using different parts than when you're drawing pictures. And also, when you are using numbers, when we put people in fMRI machines, there's a strip on the side of the brain that lights up in when we're doing math and playing with numbers. So words, pictures, and numbers, each one of these actually lights up different regions of the brain. So why not intentionally pull in all of those and see what happens? When you think quantitatively, counting things, your brain is thinking in a different way. And I'm not saying that one way of thinking is better than another. I'm saying that they're fundamentally different, and that's why it's useful. So here's a big post by San Francisco Bay, and it's starting to rot. And I can sort of, and what I did is I put measurements in, because the level of the water up and down ends up being a really important part of understanding a post like this. What is the size of it? So the size of this is a really useful thing to put in. And here, because that post was out, I couldn't go all the way up to it because it was out in the water a little bit. You know, my sizes are approximate, but that's so much better than not having them at all. An approximation is so much more useful than no data. If you can measure something precisely, that's great. If not, that's great. Here's another example of numbers on a page. If you look over on the right-hand side, I'm looking at what kind of animals came to feast on a dead wildebeest. And I'm counting the numbers of different kinds of vultures that fly in. So if you notice on the right-hand side, there's a few little dots. Now that's kind of interesting. Let me just do a little picture to you. I'm going to show you a better way to keep track of counting in your journal. This is kind of fun. Let's go to this camera here. And I'm just going to use a piece of paper here. And I've got a pen. So the way that most people count things is like this. They will go, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We make these little hatch marks. But then you get a whole bunch of these and it's hard to read. Here is a better way to keep track of these things. This is really fun. We call this the dot line method. So what you do is you go 1 and you draw a dot. 2, draw another dot. 3, draw another dot. 4, draw another dot. So at first 4 dots, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So each group of 10 is a box with an exit through it. If 12 more things show up, I'm going to do that. 5 more things show up, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the dot line method. It's really fun to do, and it's a better method of keeping track of things. Like, who knew that there was a better way of keeping track of counting? So that's why I want to encourage people to, I want to encourage you to sort of develop a whole range of ways of using numbers, a whole range of ways of using pictures, a whole range of ways of using words. The more you do that, you've got more tools in your mental toolkit of how you can approach any investigation, and it becomes a lot of fun. This was cool. I was working with a bunch of children in, these were 3rd graders, and after a rainstorm, a bunch of worms came out and crawled across their playground. And what we did is we walked out across the playground and we counted how many worms we found at different distances from the grassy area. And we discovered that a bunch of these little worms had gone on really big adventures. And we graphed it. So if you take your pictures and you turn it into a graph, it's much easier to visualize and think about what you see. And we can figure out what distance most of them were. And we thought that was pretty cool. We went back inside because it was starting to sprinkle again. One of the students looked out and he said, look out there. What's going on? We looked out, and out on the schoolyard, there were all of these gulls flying down. Birds were flying down and eating worms. So we ran back out and did a second count. And that's that second graph. And there were only 2 worms left. They had cleaned out the entire field in just 45 minutes. And those were 2 that were really close to the edge of the grass. I mean, what an interesting pattern. And being able to, you can visualize that because we graphed it. So if you can turn any of your numbers into a picture, do it. This is an example of what we call deep geeking out. This is a diagram of the schoolyard next to my house, and the path of the sun on the solstice, the equinoxes, and finally the winter solstice towards the bottom. This is an example of making very careful measurements, kind of coming up with a grid system and plotting things out. What was interesting about this is that the advanced thinking of kind of coming up with a system really motivated me to get out again and again and again during the day to notice the path of the sun. And then I had a project. I wanted to do this at the equinox. I wanted to do this at the other solstice. So one in summer, one in winter. And the result is really interesting patterns in how wide the path of the sun is, how tall the path of the sun is. You can learn a lot by making your own observations and documenting those in your book. So this is, again, is a place where very often my journal page, everything sort of happens on one day. But this is a page that invites you to have a project and to come back to that again and again and again at different times. And by doing that, we're able to pick out patterns and connections that otherwise we would never see. Here's doing the same activity, but right close to the equator during a summer solstice when the sun was to my north. The first page was when the sun was to my south, when I was far in the northern hemisphere. But you'll notice that the path of the sun in one case goes one direction and the opposite direction in the other. That was really, really fun to see. But, you know, if I were not keeping a journal page, there's no way I would be able to remember which way the sun was going, nor would I be motivated to get out there again and again and again to sort of watch these patterns. So this is another window into the power of nature journaling. It gives you a project, and that project then motivates you to look again and again and again. If you're interested in putting more numbers into your nature journal, this is a little, what I call the quantification toolkit. It is a page that's a free download on my website. So if you go to johnmuirlaws.com, you can download this and then tape it into the back of your nature journal if you want to have rulers and protractors and ways of measuring distance across the skies and other sorts of phenomena. It's a sort of an invitation to give you more strategies of how you can find numbers in your investigations in nature. So there it is. What is nature journaling? Nature journaling is the process of getting your observations. I notice, your questions. I wonder, your connections. It reminds me of, down on a piece of paper by using words, pictures, and numbers. And what you do is you take those two triads and you put them together and you push that down onto the page of your journal. Each one of these ways of thinking and these ways of recording information will encourage your brain to look more closely and to look in ways that will allow you to discover things that you never knew were there. And the world opens up and shares its secrets with you. You can do this. You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a naturalist or bird watcher to get started. You just have to be curious and motivated to make the next page and the next page and the next page. The more you do that, the more you will develop these skills. And the more that the natural world around you will unfold and open up and share its secrets. I want to invite you to come out with us, to play in this world, to embrace it, discover the mysteries, and then together as a community, we can move forward to protect this incredible resource that we love. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope that these strategies help launch you on an incredible adventure of nature journaling.